afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Devane Hancock on the Devane Hancock podcast. It's been so long. It's been too long since the last time we spoke. It hasn't been neglect on my part. I have been very busy in my daily life, if you will. I just recently got a promotion on my job that I've been on for 5 years. I've just been recently promoted. So, a lot of new responsibilities and new schedule, going from the morning tour to the overnight tour, now back to the morning tour. So I've been very busy, but I mean, there's been so much things that I wanted to talk about, but just didn't have the time. But I would have been remiss if I had missed making a podcast today, considering that last night was election night in the United States. And as we all have found out either late last night or early last night, or as you could have told from the way the numbers was going, Donald Trump is now the president of the United States. You just got to let that sink in for a moment. That Donald Trump is now the 45th president of the United States of America. I mean, it's like so much that I want to discuss. I may have to actually break this down into more than one podcast. Uh, Boy, as most of you may have known, I was rooting for Hillary Clinton. I voted for Hillary Clinton yesterday, and as you can see, the results didn't work out exactly the way most of us had wanted to. But I will say this: there was a lot of people who are going to wake up this morning and who's going to say Donald Trump cheated, Donald Trump did this, the election was unfair, so on and so forth. I can tell you this: the election was not unfair. Donald Trump won fair and square. Um, if you look by the numbers, and if you had stayed with CNN, I know there's CNN is the butt of a lot of jokes for a lot of conservative and a lot of Republican pundits, but CNN did an excellent job of breaking down the election last night, especially with that big magic board. I wish I had one of those in my house. I think it's very obvious why Hillary Clinton lost last night. Few things. Firstly, diehard Bernie Sanders supporters, they were stubborn in their ways and they stayed home. Also, I think that a lot of blacks voters decided to stay home since the black guy wasn't running this year. If you look at the electoral map, Hillary Clinton actually lost a ton of ground as far as states that and congressional districts that Obama had carried in 2008 and in 2012. You also have to take into account that after the failed George W. Bush administration, a lot of Republicans were in exile. In 2012, a lot of them did not care for Mitt Romney. A lot of them stayed home. So that also helped put Donald Trump over the top as far as winning the vote. And it's also, as I have been saying for a long time to people I've spoken to and on some of my Facebook posts and other social media posts, Barack Obama took the country entirely too far to the left. It was the visuals. Seeing the White House light up in rainbow colors. Seeing Jay-Z and Beyonce at the White House. The Obamacare policy, which put extra paperwork in your IRS return taxes this year. That extra form that you have to fill out. Like I said, an Obamacare policy that the majority of the country, both Republican and Democrat, black and white, and Latino, were against, and it was forced upon us. There was also the jealousy of the Obamas. The Obama administration, as far as personal scandals, was pretty much scandal free. They were pretty much a squeaky clean family. They were a very photogenic family. And I think that there was a lot of jealousy on the part of by many people of the Obamas as well. As I stated before, the diehard Bernie Sanders supporters, they stayed home. And Donald Trump basically took away a page out of the Barack Obama playbook that he used in 2008 when he was the candidate of change, of hope and change. Change and hope. Donald Trump was the candidate of change, but in this case, he was the candidate of change, anger, and fear. A lot of people, not only white folks, as they want to now try to pin this victory for Donald Trump on white folks, people who didn't have college educations. There were also a lot of non-whites also that voted for Trump. As I stated before about the Obamacare policies, there was also the refusal to call Islamic terrorism just that, Islamic terrorism. There was a refusal to call for the vetting of Syrian refugees. It's not cool, man. It's not cool at all. And like I said, I'm somebody who voted for Hillary Clinton and was hoping that she won. But like I said, the Obama administration took this country entirely too far to the left. And I think that it was very difficult for this country to go and make history twice. First, having a black man in office for 2 terms, and then turning right around and having the first female, the first woman president in office. I think that that was just entirely too much for the country. And I think that worked against Hillary Clinton a lot. Also, if you look at the electoral college map, really not that much has changed as far as the dividing lines between states since the Civil War. The majority of the red states were Confederate states, and they still vote red. The majority of the Union states during the Civil War still vote blue. And those lines, for to have been well over 200 years ago, those lines really have not changed. In fact, I really find it surprising that it's actually very difficult when you think about it for a Democrat really to even take the White House. When you look at the electoral map and you really think about all of the elections that have happened since FDR, Truman, he barely beat Dewey by a small margin. JFK, he had just squeezed by Nixon. Carter, he was from Georgia. He did beat Ford, who was a holdover from the scandal-ridden Nixon administration. And then you had Clinton, an Arkansas good old boy, who beat a very aloof and a very disconnected George H.W. Bush. Plus, you also have to throw in the third-party candidate of Ross Perot, who probably played a huge role in that. And then, of course, in 2008, 2012, you had the hope and change with Obama, making history by having the first African American in elected office. So, it was an uphill battle all throughout for Hillary to even try to win this election. And, I pretty much watched the election coverage from start to finish on CNN. I think I got in bed around about 1 o'clock. When the election first started, you know that the traditional red states were going to go for Trump. So Hillary and her supporters, like myself, we really had our hopes pinned on Florida. And then when it became obvious that Florida was going to go for Trump, our attentions then turned to Ohio and Pennsylvania. Ohio was quickly taken off of the playboard. Almost immediately, as soon as the polls closed, Ohio automatically went red. So our last ditch hope, our last line of defense was Pennsylvania. And that's where all the drama was. And Hillary Clinton held on to Pennsylvania for most of the night, all the way up until about maybe 1 o'clock in the morning. Once Trump turned it over by a couple of hundred of votes, then once he turned it over by about 2,000 votes, we knew right from there, or rather I knew right from there, that the election was pretty much over. Because you had Michigan and Wisconsin, which were considered toss-up states that also both were leaning heavily towards Trump. So this election really was lost in Pennsylvania. Once Trump was able to capture Pennsylvania, that was pretty much all she wrote. It's disappointing. It's disappointing. It's disappointing. It's heartbreaking. But it was really a foregone conclusion. Like I said, when you saw how the electoral map was shaping up, you were hoping on those blue states. And like I said, the last line of defense was Pennsylvania. And once Pennsylvania fell red, you pretty much knew that the election was pretty much over. Like I said, there is so much to talk about. I'm really not going to be able to get it all into this one podcast because as I'm seeing the clock here, I'm actually running out of time. So I am going to try to make a secondary podcast to discuss the ramifications of a Trump White House. Like I said, it was shocking. It was disappointing. It was surprising. But it, again, was not that surprising, especially when you consider the fact that these elections are decided by the Electoral College. And I think that if you're somebody like myself who lives in an urban area, I live in New York City, or if you live in big cities like Los Angeles or Chicago, so have you, you can actually fool yourself into believing that this country is more liberal than it really is. I got an announcement for you, ladies and gentlemen. It isn't. This country is extremely, extremely conservative. It is extremely, extremely red. And as I stated at the beginning of this podcast, making history twice by first having a first African American and then following by having a first woman president was just entirely too much for this country. They were not able to handle it. And when you live in these urban areas, you would think that maybe that the country was progressive enough in order to have a female president. Well, like I said, do yourself a favor. Go pick up a newspaper. Turn to CNN. Turn to CBS. Look at that electoral map. Look at all of the red. The vast majority of this country is red. Rather it be racists who decided to vote for Trump. And like I said, it wasn't all had to do with racism. I got a bombshell for you. A lot of Obama supporters probably switched over to the Trump side. So Trump's win is not about racism. You know, it's about a lot of other issues besides that. And like I said, I hope to discuss it in the second part of this podcast because it is really a lot that I really have to get off my chest. But this concludes the first part of this podcast. And, you know, I guess you have to say congratulations to President-elect Trump. You know, even though I disagree with him, I hope that he does well because when the president does well, the country does well. But only time will tell. See you in part 2.